Hello everyone, it's Air Conda here with another episode of Storied Sorties. This is going to be episode 2, but episode 9 in the series. And we will be continuing on with the M4 Alpha 3 Echo 8 Easy 8 Sherman tank. This time we're still continuing on the upper hall, but this time as far as the narrative part of the video, I actually have a script somewhat formed, because I realized I sounded jumbled and all over the place in last week's episode. So I'm going to be trying to be more uniformed and more smooth in my talking points to ensure better quality for the video. Like I said, last week we were working on the upper hall. This week we're going to essentially finish the upper hall. I still got a few things to add to it here and there. And then we'll finally get to move on to the lower hall. So maybe by next episode, which will be part 3 of the Sherman series, we will be looking at assembling the lower hall. I'm pretty excited as well, because another change that's coming to the Storied Sorties series is the fact that I will be using game footage from Tank Mechanic Simulator. Finally had my first Easy 8 Sherman show up in the garage for restoration, and it was actually a doozy. Got quite beat up by the looks of it and had a lot to be fixed and repaired. So what I'm going to do is, in probably the next episode when I work on the lower hall, hopefully the lower hall, we will have footage from Tank Mechanic Simulator, but that is for later videos. For now, we will continue to work on the upper hall and go into a little bit more about the history of the M4 Sherman series of tanks. And right now I'm going to be using an article from Wikipedia, and maybe we'll move on to some other actually stories about the Sherman in this episode, depending how much time I got left in the recording. Or we can wait till the next episode and actually get to historic stories about the Sherman. I couldn't exactly find any stories about the Sherman Easy 8 tank, but maybe I haven't searched hard enough to see them. But I will continue to keep looking for stories and see if I can find something related to the specific tank I'm working on in this model kit series. For now, though, we will be reading more about the history of the M4 series. So let's go ahead and get into this before the video gets way too long. And the video, I already have the video edited. I already know how long it's going to be, but I need to make sure this audio recording stays within that time frame, and me rambling on like this isn't helping. So we'll go ahead and get into the article from Wikipedia, talk about the M4 Sherman and the whole tank series that has been used by the Allied forces during World War II, and then some forces later on through Korea. I mean, obviously, I said in the last episode, this tank has been used by many countries throughout the world, up until I think as late as 2018, as I said, in a South American country. I can't remember which one. So it's a versatile tank, but then again, a lot of tanks made during World War II were pretty versatile and continue to be used throughout the years. Some tanks from other countries may even still be in service. But let's go ahead and get into that, and we'll talk more about the Sherman. Another reason why the Sherman was so popular amongst the Allied forces was because it was a reliable, relatively cheap to produce, and it was always available in great numbers. And I think honestly that might have been a setback to the Allies, because they were more worried about numbers and the cheapness of the vehicle than its firepower and strength. Now, the early war M4s were actually considerably powerful compared to the German light and medium tanks, so it did help get its foot in the door for popularity. Was also a basis for several successful tank destroyers like the M10, Achilles, and the M36, and tens of thousands were distributed through the Lend-Lease program. Before I get into the Lend-Lease program, I'll talk more about the chassis. Now, this Wikipedia article talks about how the ability to make it a platform for not only a medium to heavy tank, but also a platform for a tank destroyer, as like a big selling point to the Allied forces for this. But honestly, if you really look at any tank from that time period, a lot of tanks from many countries, including Germany, Russia, and Germany and Russia, if you look, a lot of their tanks have a base chassis that is used across many platforms, from light tanks to tank destroyers. and even to go as big as heavy tanks. So I don't understand how this would be a big selling point to the Allied forces. The T-34 even itself, I think, if I remember correctly, has its chassis used on multiple platforms, but I could be wrong, which was considered one of the kind of sort of equals to the M4 during the war, but obviously on the Russian side then. But so yeah, I guess that's a good selling point. I mean, the M10, the Achilles, and M36 were pretty decent tank destroyers. They're tanks actually I'm looking to build in future kits. I'm fascinated with that series. It just looks cool. I know it's basically a Sherman with a bigger gun and faster mobility and lighter armor and an open turret, but nonetheless, I love tank models, and I'll always look for excuses to build more. Now, aircraft models I don't mind doing. They tend to be more complicated, and I get a little more nervous around them, but we'll see how that goes with the next one being a B-17. I'm actually kind of excited about that one, but like I said earlier, though, tens of thousands of the M4 were distributed out amongst the Allied countries, in Russia, including Russia, but that wasn't until later in the war when the Germans finally betrayed Russia through the Lend-Lease program. The two main countries, obviously, I already said Russia, the Soviet Union, but also the British Commonwealth, which actually I found out something interesting reading the Wikipedia article. I was always under the impression the Americans gave the name to the Sherman because, I mean, it's named after a Civil War General William T. Sherman, which is known for Sherman's march across the South from, I believe, Georgia to the coast. I can't remember. Carolina coast. I have to look that up again. But it was actually the British that named the Sherman after that Civil War general. Like I said, I always knew it was named after him, but I did not realize it was the British that named it. But that's a pretty interesting tidbit. I mean, it's not uncommon for the World War II tanks to be named after Civil War generals. Actually, it's not uncommon for them to be named after generals, and specifically like the can't remember if it's the M2, but the Bradley fighting vehicle is named after Omar Bradley from World War II. Abrams is named after, I think he's another Civil War general. I could be wrong though. Then you have the M2 Lee, the M3 Grant is what actually the Sherman M4, the M4 Sherman evolved from the M3. I'm getting all over the place on these names. It should be the M3 Lee actually, but it was also known as the Grant. I think the British had the Grant version from the early war, but I could be wrong about that. I'm not entirely positive. I'm actually suddenly fuzzy on my tank names and the history behind them. But the M4 tank went into combat actually originally in North Africa with the British Army at El Alamein in late 1942. One of the things that it actually made it stand out the most to the Allies and actually helped its chances of being the predominant tank of the Allies is its increased advantage over the Germans' armor, or the Axis armor, because the Axis actually include Germany, Italy, and Russia in the beginning. It was superior to the lighter German and Italian tank designs. For this reason, the U.S. Army believed the M4 would be more adequate to win the war, and relatively little pressure was exerted for further development of the tanks for the Allied forces because of this, which actually allowed the Germans to get like leaps and bounds ahead of the Allies, and led to the production of tanks like the Tiger and the Tiger II and the Panther series tanks. The M4 quickly became outgunned and out-armored, and I think even outmaneuvered. I believe the Panther and Tiger tanks, at least the Panthers, were faster and more well-armed than the M4s. But during World War II, approximately 19,247 Shermans were issued to the U.S. Army and about 1,114 to the U.S. Marine Corps. The U.S. also supplied 17,184 to Great Britain, some of which in turn went to Canada and the Free Poles, while the Soviet Union received 4,102 and an estimated 812 were transferred to China. These numbers were distributed further to respective countries' allied nations. Now, this is one of the things that irritates me so much in War Thunder. The Americans, because they were such the forefront of production of weapons and arms for the war, that its vehicles and equipment were basically handed out like candy all over the world. So when you play as the Americans in the early tiers, you're almost guaranteed to go up against your tank on the other team, because one of the countries that almost every country on the other team will, except with the exception of the Germans, will most likely have that tank that you are using, and it's irritating. And it just drives me off the wall. But so a lot of people don't have the same issues as me, or in that regards, mainly because they actually know how to counter these tanks and they're better at War Thunder than I am. But it's still irritating to know, like, hey, I'm going to be rolling through the streets in a jumbo. I'll be perfectly fine. Oh, look, there's a Chinese or Russian jumbo on the other team, and they're rolling down the streets with me. Now, I don't think the Russians actually had a jumbo. Chinese probably didn't either. But the point I'm trying to make is that the Russians, Chinese, I believe the French even have a Sherman. The British have Shermans. The Japanese had a captured Sherman. So it's like, no matter what, you're going to be up against a Sherman almost in the lower tiers of War Thunder. Actually quite irritating. But enough about War Thunder, my rants about that. I could probably go on all day. I hate that game so much. But to get more specific about the Lend-Lease program for the Sherman, the Red Army considered the M4A2 to be much less prone to catch fire due to ammunition detonation than the T-34-76. Actually, I find that kind of funny because I'm also highly irritated by the T-34s and the maybe not so confirmed Russian bias of War Thunder by Ganjin. But, you know, that's another topic for another day as well. And I'm sure if any of you are War Thunder fans, you've all heard it before. But the M4A2 did have a higher tendency to overturn in road accidents and collisions because of rough terrain than the T-34 due to its higher center of gravity. That's kind of funny. I mean, the Sherman was considered better because it was less likely to catch on fire when ammunition went off. But the T-34 was less likely to roll. Obviously, the T-34s were more highly used by the Soviets than the M4 because, I mean, it's their own tank. And they only got 1,500 of those things. Actually, just a little over 1,000. So it'd be kind of pointless for them to use anything else but the T-34 because they were able to mass produce those as well. And from what I've understand from this Wikipedia article, the T-34 is the only tank that could match or exceed the numbers of the M4 in terms of production during the war. That would make sense, obviously. Plus, like I said, the M4 wasn't given to the Russians till late war when the Russians switched sides after the Germans betrayed them. But that's not when the M4 ended. Obviously, like I said, it made it up to service to 2018, and I think it's Argentina. It was a South American country. I just can't remember off the top of my head. If you want to know which one it was, go ahead and watch a previous episode of Storied Stories. But anyway, after World War II, the U.S. kept the M4A3E8 Easy 8 in service, which is the tank model you're watching me put together right now by Tamiya. It had its 76mm gun or a 105mm M4 howitzer, which this model kit is the 76mm, not the 105. I would love to put a 105 together, but I don't know if they got any model kits of the 105. But anyway, sorry. The Sherman remained a common U.S. tank in the Korean War, where it fought alongside the M26 Pershing, also another general in the Army, and the M46 Patton. Well, that's a given. I say everybody. Not everybody is as enthralled in World War II history as I am, but everybody should be aware of Patton, especially if they've seen the movie with George C. Scott in it playing Patton. Amazing movie if you got the time. It is actually quite long. It's back from a time period where movies had intermissions because they ran so long. But I digress. We're not here to do movie reviews and criticize movies or anything like that. But hey, still recommend it. If you guys are interested in a good World War II movie with George C. Scott in it about General Patton, I highly recommend it. Great movie, 10 out of 10. And just in my opinion. But like I said, if you're not into long, boring long movies, I would probably not watch it. But anyway, back on, because I'm kind of getting off topic here. Back on the Sherman. One of the things I'm going to finish up with is to talk about how the M4A3 76W HVSS Sherman and the T-34 during the Korean War were comparable and could actually destroy each other over long or normal combat ranges Although the use of the high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition, advanced optics, and better crew training gave the Sherman an advantage over the T-34. So even the T-34 went on for a while into the Korean War, but the M4 due to some upgrades to it and a much well-trained crew, was able to outclass the T-34 by the sounds of it. I would be curious to see what the kill numbers are compared between the two, to see if they are actually comparable. And if the Wikipedia article is correct about how well the M4 did up against the T-34. It sounds like overall they're pretty equal, but the M4 had a slight advantage. So the M4 has a pretty interesting history and background. It's one of my favorite tanks from World War II. I like a lot of the German line tanks too. The Panzers, the Tiger 1. I didn't really get into the Panthers or the Tiger 2s because I wasn't really a huge fan of those. But the early war models are variants of tanks that the Americans and Germans had. I do enjoy. One of my favorite tanks from the British is the Churchill, which I have a model kit of the Churchill. I'll be putting together later. And Russian T-34s are not bad at all. The overall Russian line during that time period wasn't that impressive to me as far as looks. This is all based on looks, not about performance. If I was going on performance, I promise that list would be completely different. But anyway, we're getting off topic. We're going to go ahead and wrap up this video. Next week, we will actually get into some stories of engagements involved with the M4 Sherman. Maybe even talk about how the movies it's been in, like the EZ-8, which was specifically one was used that most notable as of recently is Fury. That was an EZ-8. We'll talk about how that we came to use too as well, and then I'll also mention probably a diorama I'm thinking about doing, my first one, involving, it won't be an EZ-8, but it will involve a jumbo from an old movie with Clint Eastwood in it, called Kelly's Heroes, and the tank commander known as Oddball. And one of my favorite scenes from that movie I'm going to reenact or recreate with a jumbo Sherman model kit, the M43A2. M4A3E2, and its engagement up against a early production Tiger H1. And there's actually an interesting story about that particular Tiger that they used for the movie, but I will get into that when I get to that diorama. But yeah, that's about it. I hope you guys are enjoying the series. It looks like it's fairly popular on my YouTube channel, so keep watching, leave likes and comments, let me know what you'd like to see in future videos. And I hope you all actually enjoy these kits. I'm trying to do better on my editing of the video clips to make the transitions, well, not really smoother because I'm not using transitions, but at least the clips more entertaining instead of just me spending hours on one tiny part of the tank, but at least maybe get a couple clips. I think if I remember correctly, one part of the video I struggled put it on side brackets for the side skirts for the M4. So I want to make sure that is edited well, which I did actually, hopefully very well with it. Just let me know what you think below so it isn't long and dragged out. But anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think and see you in the next one.